Monday on CBS.
We are so excited, we just can't hide it.
CBS Mornings, weekdays on CBS.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
it's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
We have learned is that the FBI also went to that location after those documents were first found on November 2nd.
We want to know what Republicans value, and we want to know how they're going to protect Social Security and Medicare.
Met with George Santos yesterday, and I think it was an appropriate decision that until he can clear everything up, he's off of committees right now.
I decline to answer the question.
At this time in the crisis of American policing, you actually want to raise the standards, not lower them.
Welcome to Red and Blue. I'm Nancy Cordes in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for joining us. We're beginning tonight with developments in investigations into both President Biden and former President Trump. Sources tell CBS News the FBI searched the Penn Biden Center offices in mid-November. Now, we didn't know about that search before. It came after lawyers for President Biden found about 10 documents marked classified on November 2nd. And sources say the search was conducted with the cooperation of Mr. Biden's representatives and that the FBI did not seek a search warrant. CBS News has also obtained video of portions of former President Trump's deposition with New York Attorney General Letitia James. This video shows Mr. Trump sitting for a deposition last August during a civil fraud investigation. The former president invoked the Fifth Amendment for nearly 4 hours.
If you're innocent, why are you taking the Fifth Amendment? I was asking that question. Now I know the answer to that question. When your family, your company, and all the people in your orbit have become the targets of an unfounded, politically motivated witch hunt supported by lawyers, prosecutors, and even the fake news media, you really have no choice. Anyone in my position not taking the Fifth Amendment would be a fool, an absolute fool.
For more on all this and what it means for our politics, Stephen Portnoy and Nicole Killian join us now. Stephen is CBS News Radio White House correspondent, and Nicole is CBS News Congressional correspondent. Welcome to you both. And Stephen, I will start with you. So we thought we knew about all the searches. It turns out we did not know about all of the searches. Does the White House have any explanation for why we're only finding out now about an FBI search that took place a couple of months ago?
Not really. No, Nancy, no, not really. We don't really have a full explanation. The White House communications director did say today that the White House has issued multiple statements along with the president's personal lawyer and that they're cooperating with the Justice Department. But this revelation today, which came to us from our Crackerjack team, Arden Fari and Adriana Diaz, this is the latest bit of reporting from this team that has brought forward details that no one had previously known. Really does just continue to raise more questions about whether there's anything else that the White House or the president's personal attorneys are keeping from the public. And it does, to an extent, continue to raise that vulnerability for the president. But one other thing that the White House communications director said today, she pointed to our poll that came out on Sunday from CBS News, which shows that 54% of those polled said they think the president's handling this well, and 61% say that Joe Biden is cooperating with the Justice Department's investigation. 80%, however, say that this is something the Justice Department is properly looking into.
And the significance of this, of course, is that clearly DOJ was concerned enough about the possibility that there were more classified documents at the Penn Biden Center beyond what the Biden lawyers had unearthed, that they felt that they needed to come search as well, although we still don't know exactly what they found there. Nicole, we now have a bipartisan request for the first time for more information about these documents. You've got the chair and the vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee saying they want to see what was gathered at the Biden home and at the Penn Biden Center. They want to understand what kind of secrets were being held there. Why do they want this information, and how likely are they to get these documents from DOJ in the midst of a DOJ investigation?
Well, in terms of Senators Warner and Rubio, I mean, they believe that their key role is oversight. And because they lead the Intelligence Committee, that's why they say that it is important to get information like this, not so much so that they can get to the bottom of what happened, but more so to get to the bottom of what these documents were and whether any intelligence was compromised in the process and how to mitigate that in the future. So they certainly understand their lane. You know, they're not trying to get into the same type of investigation that is being pursued by the Department of Justice and the special counsel. They simply want to figure out what these documents were. Was there any intelligence that was compromised? And again, how to mitigate that. And so that is why they want this information. And they're a little frustrated, too, because if you think about that Mar-a-Lago search, that happened last year, some 6 months ago, in terms of the Biden documents. While we just learned about that at the beginning of this year, technically they were discovered at the end of last year. So they feel there has been a lot of time that has lapsed from the discovery of these documents, and yet they still don't have information. Mitch McConnell also saying today to reporters that he certainly supports the request from these committee chairmen, and he believes that it is entirely reasonable.
Stephen, we also got this first look today at a deposition, a pretty unusual deposition of former President Trump in this New York fraud case, where he literally pled the Fifth in response to hundreds of questions. This is someone who has mocked others for pleading the Fifth in the past. What's the significance of this case and the significance of the fact that he decided to plead the Fifth, even as he expounded on the case as he was undergoing this deposition?
Well, of course, this is the fraud trial that was brought and is being brought by the Attorney General of New York State, who was actually in the room with Donald Trump when this deposition was taken in August. And in the preamble to his not answering questions, Donald Trump did deliver a lengthy statement, which seemed tailor-made for his own audience to hear, his own base. And one of the things that you heard him say in the soundbite that we played earlier is the idea that anyone who didn't plead the Fifth is a fool. But he also said that he sees this as a witch hunt. He said to Letitia James, while she was seated at the table, that he believed it to be unfair. And he also made the point of saying that this was all happening just 2 days after the FBI went into his home in Mar-a-Lago for that search back in August. On the whole, though, you see over hours of this deposition, the former president simply saying same answer, in an almost disciplined way. Mm-hmm. But also at times you see him shaking his head, almost as if to say either he was rejecting the premise of a question or nodding his head, but simply saying for the transcript and for the record, same answer, pleading the Fifth, citing his right to avoid self-incrimination.
Interesting. Nicole, I want to ask you about another politician, New York Congressman George Santos, who suddenly today, after not taking a lot of responsibility for a lot of these falsehoods that he has told, suddenly announcing that he is going to recuse himself from his congressional committees. What rationale did he give for doing this? And give everyone an understanding of just how unusual it is for a member of Congress to say, I'm going to remove myself from these committees until this ethics cloud over me is gone.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of layers to this. What we do know is that Congressman Santos announced this decision during a closed-door GOP conference meeting where he said that he did not want to be a distraction, and so he felt it was best to step aside from these two committees, one the Committee on Small Business, the other Committee on Science, and so he felt that it was prudent to do that until his name is cleared. And he said late today that he is confident that his name has been cleared. But while certainly we know that the congressman is ensnared in a number of investigations, both federally, internationally, locally, and even, here in Congress with respect to the Ethics Committee, there is also this other dynamic where both in the House and Senate, they still haven't ironed out all of their business as it relates to committees in the sense of organizing. And so in terms of the House, of course, you have a situation where Speaker Kevin McCarthy wants to remove Congresswoman Ilhan Omar from Minnesota off of the Foreign Affairs panel. He hopes to move forward with a vote on that soon. But the concern was if he did that, then potentially there could be a resolution introduced to try to remove Santos from his committee. So some of this could also have been a preemptive move by Santos as well. McCarthy saying that he is appreciative of Santos's decision here.
Right. It sounds like he may have seen the writing on the wall. Okay, Nicole Killian on Capitol Hill. Stephen Portnoy here with me. Thank you so much. With all eyes on President Biden and Speaker McCarthy tomorrow, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is speaking out about how he thinks the debt ceiling should be handled. We're going to speak to Oklahoma Republican Senator James Lankford about this view of the debate from the Senate side next. We're streaming Red and Blue, reporting across the political divide.
Original documentary from CBS reports tensions rising between a powerful country and a vital island.
The supply of this technology came grinding to a halt. The world would grind to a halt.
Absolutely.
As Taiwan faces threats and aggression,
Taiwan is on the front line, and we understand our responsibility as a democracy. We cannot fall.
CBS News examines whether they can defend themselves.
Putin, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, they are manifestations of the battle between autocracy and democracy. And that is a fight that we're all engaged in.
Defending Taiwan, now streaming on the free CBS News app. When weather turns extreme,
states from the plains to the northeast are bracing for more than 2 feet of heavy snow.
Every second counts.
This is a monster winter storm.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
There's a wrinkle in the forecast, the accumulating ice.
You'll have time to get prepared.
Take precautions before you head out.
Feel the forecast on the CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
The carnage in our nation's schools has become painfully repetitive.
Now one more child!
School shootings have parents fighting mad.
I promised my daughter I was going to fight. It's going to keep on happening.
And teachers taking lessons in how to fight back.
This is an exercise.
We approach it as it's you or them.
It shouldn't have to be your teacher's job to protect your life.
But will the battle over gun control,
People are afraid that they're going to lose their gun rights altogether.
be the hardest lesson of all?
The exercise, you're having to shoot at an adult. Are you prepared to have to kill one of your students?
Guns in the Classroom, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Nancy Cordes. 24 Republican senators signed and sent a letter to the president in recent days saying they are not going to vote to increase the debt limit unless there is, quote, meaningful structural reform in spending. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell did not sign that letter, but he spoke on the upcoming McCarthy-Biden meeting today.
I think the deal has to be cut, obviously, between the House majority and the Democratic president in order to have a chance to survive over here. So we're all behind Kevin and wishing him well.
One of the 24 senators who did sign that letter is Oklahoma Republican James Lankford, who joins us now from Washington. Hi, Senator. Thank you so much for being with us.
Good to see you. Glad to be on with you.
So your letter says you're not going to vote to raise the debt ceiling unless it's connected to spending cuts. So that leads to the obvious question. What kinds of spending cuts are you looking for, and how large of cuts are you seeking? What would you be satisfied with?
So we're actually the letter itself just says that we're looking for structural reforms on this. We're looking for a change in trajectory. We're the only country in the world that has a debt ceiling vote. No other country does this. The reason we have a debt ceiling vote, and what it has been historically, is to force us, when we get to that moment that we realize we're going to have to increase our debt ceiling, to talk about how do we do this less. Just in my lifetime, we've had 8 different times where we've had a debt ceiling increase that's also been attached to some kind of structural reform. It's a moment when we should actually talk about how do we have less debt? How do we get us back on the right path? We're $31.5 trillion in total debt. I think it's time we actually have some conversation about stopping to increase so much debt and actually pay some of our responsible debts.
So what kind of reform do you think would make sense?
Well, I'm going to allow Speaker McCarthy, actually, and the president to be able to talk this through as far as to go through the details. There are a lot of options on the table there. There's not a specific piece to say everything has to be this, for instance, but there are a lot of changes that you can make. The way we do our budgeting clearly has not worked. The budget process was created in 1974. It's only worked about 4 times the way that it was actually designed. We should have a better budget process. We should have more ways to be able to actually engage in how our spending is done. We should end government shutdowns. I have a bipartisan bill with Senator Maggie Hassan to talk about ending government shutdowns. That should be a part of this, to say, let's not have a government shutdown that just spends more money. It causes chaos around the country and around the world, quite frankly. Let's actually talk about how we deal with spending, but not have a shutdown in the process. So some of it just structural reforms of how we do things. We've got to at least talk about these things. We shouldn't just ignore it and pretend it's just going to get better someday. We've got to actually talk about it.
Would you be content with a process that ends up doing away with the need to raise the debt limit altogether?
Well, there's a lot of things that we've talked about this. I have a proposal on dealing with the debt limit itself to say, if we have actually, we're reducing our deficit, in other words, we're headed the right direction, we wouldn't have to have debt ceiling votes. But if we're increasing our debt, we would. That's a proposal I've had actually out there for several years. Again, there's lots of different ways to be able to get to this, and we're glad to be able to have the open conversation, and we're hopeful that President Biden acknowledges what is obvious to the rest of the world. We have a debt issue. We actually have more debt than the total GDP of the country right now. We've not had that since World War II. This is a big issue to us. We've got to be able to find a way to be able to change this. Quite frankly, it's responsible for Americans, but it's responsible for the whole world. We are the superpower of the world. We need to act like it, and part of that is paying our own bills.
There's no question that the debt is enormous and it continues to grow. But there are a lot more economists out there saying that they are concerned about the problems associated with a default than there are economists who say they have immediate concerns about the debt itself and what it could do to our economy. So are you worried that that we are being set up for such brinksmanship here in Washington? You've got Speaker McCarthy meeting with the president tomorrow saying he is not going to go along with raising the debt limit unless there are significant spending cuts. How concerned are you that we do get to the brink and that U.S. credit gets downgraded?
Well, I would definitely hope that doesn't occur. That's not the target for anyone. I don't know of anyone that is trying not to pay America's debts. That's a responsible thing to be able to do. We have to be able to pay our debts and be responsible for the way that we handle it. But we can't just say, in the short term, we don't want to have a problem and ignore the long-term reality that we all know is coming. You can't add infinite debt, whether you're a family, a business, or a nation, and assume there's not some sort of long-term consequences. In my conversation with my colleagues is, when is the right time to talk about this? It never seems to be the right moment. It always seems to be, well, we can't talk about it now. We'll have to talk about it later. We have $31.5 trillion in total debt. When is the moment to talk about it? It wasn't the last debt ceiling. It wasn't the debt ceiling before that. It wasn't the debt ceiling before that. At what moment do we actually acknowledge the reality and say, let's talk about this? So we do have to deal with short-term consequences. We can't have default, but we also need to deal with long-term consequences. You really do have accelerating inflation, all kinds of other fiscal issues that occur when you have this kind of heavy debt load.
Got it. Senator, I want to switch gears and ask you about immigration. You were part of a bipartisan delegation that went to the southern border earlier this month. And after that, you put out a statement that read in part, quote, "In my multiple trips to the border over the past several years, I have heard firsthand from the agents on the ground about the problems they face and the obvious solutions that would secure our border." Senator, what are those, quote, obvious solutions? And how likely is it, do you think, that Congress will actually finally get around to passing comprehensive immigration reform that would address some of those obvious problems and solutions?
Yeah, so you really have two issues here. You're separating up what the administration could do right now, and then also what Congress has got to do that is undone on this. Both those deal initially with asylum. The way that we handle asylum is different than anyone else in the world on this, and it is not a consistent way to be able to deal with this. A lot of people think the people that are coming across our southwest border are folks that are fleeing poverty and persecution from Central America, but they're literally people from all over the world. When we were in Yuma, Arizona a few weeks ago, there were more people crossing at Yuma that are from Uzbekistan than there are from El Salvador. We have people from all over the world coming at all times of the day and night. When I was in El Paso a few weeks ago, we watched Mounted Patrol actually arrest a couple of Chinese nationals that were running across the border in the night. We don't know why they were coming or what their background is. We have no other information about them. So the way we handle asylum needs work on the legislative side, but also needs greater enforcement on the administrative side. So there's work to be able to be done on both, and we've got to be able to sit down and actually work this out to have a reasonable immigration system. I just don't run into people that are opposed to legal immigration. We just have a problem when we have literally twice as many people illegally coming into our country than we do legally coming into our country. That's a problem.
One of your tweets from last night caught my eye. You said, quote, "Why does the Biden administration refuse to admit that the crisis at the border is of their own making?" Senator, the problems at the border have stretched back decades. So what did you mean by that, the fact that the problems at the border are the Biden administration's fault?
So let me take this as straightforward as I can. If I take the last 3 months of the Biden administration, there are more people that have illegally crossed the border in the last 3 months than there were in the highest year under the Obama administration. The Obama administration was both doing deportations in the country, people that were criminally here. They were doing the normal process with the courts, as well as doing their best to try to enforce the border. The Biden administration, day one, came in and said, we're not going to do deportations. We have record low numbers of people being deported, even people that a court has ordered them to be removed, that the Biden administration is not actually removing them. That sends a signal to people that are cartels and others around the world that this is the time to move people in the country. The very loose enforcement on the asylum rules have not been done by any previous president. So this is a problem of the Biden administration's own making. They can change the trajectory, and you don't have to even compare it on the Trump administration. Go to the Obama administration and see how different the border was enforced during that time period to be able to see how different it is now. The high time during the Obama administration was just over 500,000. We've exceeded that in the last 2.5 months, just under this administration. So it is something that's a policy issue. It's not just a process issue. We've seen people illegally cross, but never in these numbers.
Well, Senator, I really appreciate your time today, especially because we're on the eve of the National Prayer Breakfast, something that's very important to you, and you're integral in its success. So thank you so much for joining us today. Calls for police reform continue to grow following the violent arrest of Tyree Nichols. Our Ed O'Keefe spoke with New York City Mayor Eric Adams to get his thoughts on the matter and on the future of law enforcement. You're streaming Red and Blue.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
Yoga and wellness has become a place of anti-science.
Online clickbait.
The algorithms feed you content based upon your own fantasy.
Potentially at my peril.
There's no question about it.
Spreading digital disinformation.
Their entire yoga studio and the spiritual community got so embedded in all of the QAnon stuff that it became this sick place.
Why pro-health people are fertile ground for anti-science messages.
We can just go into the whole mask thing. A lot of us just believe that's symbolism for silencing people.
People are locked in this mindset. They've been taught to accept what the medical doctors say.
No longer are you going to be willing to take any medical advice.
It's a big problem that we urgently need to address.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
We need to put an end to this territorial status.
Will statehood create a better Puerto Rico?
So that we have the same quality of life that you see in the States.
What do you worry about?
Me living here in the future.
They're giving incentives to non-Puerto Ricans to come to Puerto Rico
and extract our natural resources and take over our land.
Vacation in Puerto Rico, and in exchange for that, you don't pay taxes.
Why would I allow somebody who abused me for 123 years to then consume me?
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now. People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
After decades in the public eye and public service, this mother-daughter duo is now talking about gutsy women.
What's the gutsiest thing you've ever done?
We go person to person with Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton and Chelsea Clinton.
Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Nancy Cordes. Police reform is under the microscope again after footage of Tyree Nichols' violent arrest was released. The 29-year-old died 3 days after a traffic stop. Earlier today, my colleague Ed O'Keefe spoke with New York City Mayor Eric Adams about the state of law enforcement in the U.S. They also spoke about President Biden's potential bid for re-election. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us with more now from New York. Okay, so Ed, it is always interesting to hear from a big city mayor about these issues, but even more interesting to hear from Eric Adams because he himself is a former police captain. What were his thoughts about what needs to happen in the wake of this violent death that the entire country has now witnessed?
And remember, Nancy, not just a police captain, but somebody who was once assaulted by a police officer at a young age. And it's part of the reason why he went into law enforcement. He reminded us today. He said watching this video for him is a reminder of all of the other previous incidents involving police officers that have either shot or assaulted subjects while on the job. And he says that there's a real need in this country for a better look at who exactly is given certain policing responsibilities and a bigger effort made to recruit the best and the brightest from Black and Latino and Asian communities to help police those neighborhoods. He says if you go into different parts of the country and say we want the best and brightest to become doctors or to become scientists or become business leaders, why are we not also spending time aggressively recruiting among those people to serve in law enforcement, as he was recruited to do back in the day at a young age? So interesting to have a conversation with somebody who has worn the uniform, who has been the victim of police violence, but now also oversees one of the largest police forces in the world.
Yeah, and obviously to recruit the best and brightest, you've got to pay them well, you've got to train them well. How optimistic, if at all, was he that there might be some kind of federal solution that Congress might finally pass police reform?
He remains optimistic that that's the kind of thing that can happen. But I think also somewhat realistic that this is an issue for cities to address in their own ways, as these kinds of situations continue to evolve. He made an interesting point that, and he's done this in other comments since the release of the Tyree Nichols video last Friday, that part of what police forces really need to do is get a sense of who exactly or what kind of police officer is doing certain tasks, the most high-profile or high-stakes policing versus somebody who might be writing traffic tickets. And he's argued that if you're not doing that as a police force, then you're not properly training or certainly deploying officers the way you should. In another set of comments in recent days, he'd said, for example, doctors are doctors, but not every doctor's a brain surgeon. A brain surgeon's a brain surgeon. And policing has to be thought about that way. Is that something that can be solved easily in federal legislation? Not necessarily, but certainly part of the debate.
Ed, you also had a really interesting conversation with him about President Biden's re-election bid in 2024. He has sometimes been critical of President Biden, particularly when it comes to immigration. What do you have to say about that?
That friends can be friendly and disagree on things, but not be disagreeable with each other. He's a huge Biden fan. I remember he ran for mayor in this city, describing himself as the Biden of Brooklyn, or a sort of mainstream moderate Democrat who understood that in order to win as a Democrat, you've got to be, strong on economic issues, talk differently about law enforcement, not about defunding police, for example, but reforming and revamping police forces. And he says the president's in great shape. Says he should absolutely be running for re-election, and he actually sees his age and experience as a potential plus, and a sign, he said, of the resilience of Americans, or a testament to the resiliency of Americans who, go to work every day or who just get up and live their lives. And it was an interesting far more positive spin on the age issue, which, Nancy, you and I know is one of the biggest potential roadblocks or variables for the president when we see poll after poll after poll suggest Democrats want somebody else to run, or that there's concern that he might be too old to run again. He'd be 86 at the end of a second term. But Count Adams in the Biden camp saying he absolutely should be running again. Looks forward to supporting him. And it's an important question to be asking of Democrats right now as the party prepares to put in place a calendar that will essentially allow the president to be renominated easily with little serious primary challenge, and as they anticipate that he will announce his reelection at some point in March or April.
Sounds fascinating, and we look forward to seeing the interview in its entirety. Thank you so much for being with us. And that does it for today. You can stream Red and Blue Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. And a reminder, if you want to watch previous episodes of the program, you can see them anytime on the CBS News website. Just head to cbsnews.com/red and blue.
Everybody wakes up in the morning and they are pelted